I'm 13 News Now meteorologist Rachael. It is Sunday evening, September 1st, 2019. We are officially in that month where we see typically climatologically the most named systems in the Atlantic hurricane. And I'll show you what the basin looks like right now, but we do have to get to Dorian. 185-mile-per-hour winds, tied for the second strongest storm in the Atlantic basin on record. The only one stronger than that as far as the winds go was Hurricane Allen, 190 miles per hour. This thing is crawling. Some of you out there that are going to be watching this, whatever platform you're watching it on, you can run faster than this thing is moving. 5 miles per hour to the west, which is horrible news for those that are in the Bahamas, whether Grand Bahamas or Abaco. They are dealing with this as it creeps by, those strong winds. Even outside of the eye wall, we still have the hurricane level winds, and then the tropical storm force winds, and then the storm surge, and then the heavy tropical rainfalls that they're all dealing with. One good thing though, we did see that pressure down to 910 millibars. It has increased to 915 millibars. Now that's not to say that we won't still have a Category 5 storm for 24 or more hours. So I do want to talk about watches and warnings. We have been upgraded to hurricane warnings for parts of the southern Florida coastline, and we also do have some storm surge warnings, and I'll show you those in just a second. But again, Daytona Beach down to just north of Miami has some sort of tropical or hurricane alert in place, and we still have those hurricane warnings in effect for the Bahamas and a hurricane watch a little bit farther to the south in the Bahamas. So as far as those storm surge alerts, we have those again from Daytona Beach down through Fort Pierce and to north of Miami. The deeper purples, this kind of pinkish color actually, that is a storm surge warning. And remember, storm surge is when we get those counterclockwise rotation winds around the storm and it starts to push or push that water onto the coastline, increasing the level of the water that is over that landmass. So we do have storm surge alerts in for the Bahamas. We're talking about potential storm surge of 20 feet. That is upwards of a story or two. So you're thinking of a building. We're talking about potentially over that first story or even higher in the Bahamas. And we've seen that water ravaging those islands. So again, 9 p.m. advisory, Category 5 storm monster. Here's what the forecast cone looks like from the National Hurricane Center. I do want to pause it. Here we are Tuesday at 2 p.m. Still a Category 4 storm as it moves north up toward the Daytona Beach area. But you're seeing, again, we have those hurricane alerts because this storm, because it's a few hundred miles across, we could be talking about still tropical storm force or hurricane force winds. Those hurricane force winds, that's 74 miles per hour or up. By Tuesday, we could be talking about 140 miles per hour or more. And remember that a hurricane is not just a point. We have those effects over a few hundred miles east, west, north, south, depending on how that storm is set up. So we are going to be seeing those effects even just a few hundred miles away from the center of the storm. So don't focus on the center of the storm. We have to talk about the effects as a whole as that radius moves through those areas. So I do want to take it out all the way to Friday. That's what this last line here is showing. That's Friday at 2 p.m. Still potentially a Category 1 storm. We are going to see weakening. That trend has been very consistent with it weakening as it moves farther and farther northward. But for us here in coastal Virginia and North Carolina, we are still in that cone of uncertainty. We've been in it for a day or so now, so we will have to watch for potential impacts. The middle of this cone actually does go over the Outer Banks of North Carolina, so we do cover that area and we will definitely be keeping a close eye. That doesn't mean we are going to get those hurricane force winds over any one area in particular. We're going to have to watch to see how this storm sets up because you're seeing just how wide that cone of uncertainty is. If it moves a little bit farther to the north and west versus south and east, those are going to have completely different impacts as far as rainfall, as far as storm surge, and also as far as potential wind damage as well. So let's compare the models on Dorian. We have the yellow, that's the GFS or the American model, and the Euro, that's in red, that's the European model. Both of these storms are showing Dorian as a very powerhouse storm. As we move forward in time, it brings it both of them bring it very close to the coastline of Florida. Neither of them, however, look to bring it inland, at least not too much. It might flirt with the coastline. Did want to pause it. Here we are Wednesday at 2 p.m. just to the southeast of Jacksonville. That's where the Euro has it. Those lines very densely packed together. So still a very dangerous historical storm, potentially, even if it only skirts the coast just to the south of Jacksonville or just to the east of Jacksonville. We do think that Jacksonville might get some effects from that. You're seeing the yellow lines of the American model, a little bit less densely packed, but still very strong of a hurricane. The closer those lines are together, the stronger the storm. So these two in pretty good agreement with the placement, GFS a little bit farther to the north. As we go farther and farther in time, the GFS pulls away, speeding up just a bit, and still maybe a little bit weaker in the intensity, but not by much than the European. So here we are Friday at 2 p.m. The GFS has had the center of the storm over the Outer Banks, and actually the European will take it pretty much in the exact path that the GFS did. So we are going to have to watch, because those are lining up, don't want to say well, but they're lining up in agreement with each other of potentially that center of the storm, if these hold true, to go over the southern Outer Banks around Cape Hatteras area. So we are going to be having to watch for that. So here are the spaghetti models. A lot of them still keep Dorian off of the coast of Florida. But again, that doesn't mean that we won't have impacts inland, because we have to talk about the 300-mile radius, or however large Dorian is going to be. A lot of them keep it off the southeast coastline, but we are going to be having to watch the coastal areas of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and even some potential impacts for southern Virginia and maybe even the Virginia Eastern Shore. Maybe some storm surge there with some winds going on, some tropical rainfall, some winds. Rip currents could be an issue, not just for Virginia and North Carolina, but through this entire path. So again, keeping an eye on that. So here is Dorian. Just looking at this gives me chills. Take a look at this monster. It made 2 landfalls on the Abaco Coast, and then we're also watching it now, as of recording this, that eye wall, the front eye wall, moving into the eastern part of Grand Bahama, Freeport, back toward the western part of that island. So we are watching Dorian, switching over to a different view. This is still infrared satellite showing you the clouds, not the rain. So Dorian, when it made landfall earlier today at 185 miles per hour, was the strongest Atlantic hurricane landfall since the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. And as I'm recording this, this is Labor Day weekend, so things timed out there kind of in a somewhat eerie sort of way. So we're seeing this happening decades later. So Labor Day hurricane, if you followed hurricanes, you know something about weather history, you know that that was a monumental storm, and we're still talking about it today. So sea surface temperatures, as it moves closer to the Florida coastline, whether it makes landfall or whether it just skirts along the coast, very warm. These temperatures in here are in the mid 80s, 85, 86, 84 degrees, and you need that 80-degree temperature to sustain tropical characteristics. And Dorian's going to have plenty of warm water to move over, whether, again, it moves over land. It's still going to have some between moving off of Grand Bahama and moving towards parts of the Florida coastline. So Dorian in the future, we are going to potentially see some fluctuations in the strength. We still have not seen that eye wall replacement cycle where the storm weakens just a bit and then replenishes and becomes potentially even stronger, possibly widening the hurricane wind field within that storm. But again, it is going to weaken as it moves north. All models agreeing on this, but still potentially a hurricane as it moves up toward areas like South Carolina and North Carolina. But wind, rain, and surge are possible for coastal Virginia and North Carolina, but exactly what? To be determined. So let's talk about rainfall. This is the European model of rainfall through parts of southern Florida. Over 2 inches, 2 to 5 inches expected from north of Miami through Jacksonville and even through parts of southeastern Georgia. Now moving this up toward the north, we're still seeing those potential rainfalls of over 2 inches. But take a look at this. As we move towards northeastern North Carolina, we start to see those heavier rainfalls amounts coming from the European prediction. 5, 7, even some areas potentially getting toward 10 inches of rain, even through parts of southern Virginia up towards Southside, Hampton Roads, the Virginia Eastern Shore, the peninsulas up through the northern neck, still possibly getting over 2 inches of rain. Let's compare that with the GFS. Take a look at this. For Florida, it's actually bringing a little bit more rain in there. You're seeing a few more areas of some browns, some whites, more so than we had all red with the European model. So those are the GFS is bringing rainfall rates potentially over 5 inches, maybe up towards 7 inches for some of those coastlines, especially south of Jacksonville, maybe north of Daytona Beach as well, or even around the Daytona Beach area. But this is not potentially a good situation if the GFS or if the rainfall totals with Dorian lean more toward the GFS solution. We are going to be talking potentially with the GFS predictions. These are rainfall totals down through southern North Carolina into South Carolina, north of Charleston, of 10, potentially upwards of 20 inches of rain. And this all is determined on what track Dorian takes. If it moves a little bit farther out to sea or if it moves a little bit farther closer to the coastline, that could change a lot. But we could be talking about some devastating rainfall in the southern United States as well as storm surge and wind damage as well. So as promised, here's the tropical satellite. We actually have 4 areas that we're watching right now. Here's Hurricane Dorian, again, moving toward Grand Bahama, making landfall in Grand Bahama. 2 landfalls already today. We're also watching this area in the middle of the Atlantic. Another storm that is coming off the Cabo Verde Islands in Africa that has a high chance of developing into our next named system, potentially tropical depression. And I'll show you what the names are. And then we have another system that we're watching into the Gulf of Mexico that has a low chance of developing within the next 5 days. So name storms by month. As I mentioned, we're moving into that peak season. 34% climatologically of our name storms have come during the month of September, and that is the peak. So we went from August, now we're into September, and we're really starting to see potentially the Atlantic basin heating up. So we're going to keep a very close eye on it. So Atlantic hurricane names, we've had Dorian. We still have Dorian, and we're going to have Dorian for about another week or so, if that. We had Tropical Storm Aaron. The next one is Fernand, and then Gabrielle. We have Umberto and Imelda. Those are the next 4 names in the Atlantic hurricane season. Remember, it's only September 1st, so we do have some time to go. So you can find me on social media. I'm posting mostly on Twitter. You can also follow me on Facebook. I'm sharing some things on there as well. Probably be sharing this on Facebook, and you can also find me on Instagram at Rachael TV. And if you're joining us from YouTube, you can click the subscribe button and tap the bell so that you're updated every time we update a new forecast.